Hello, welcome to Exotic Gardening with me, Yorkshire Kris, and on this week's episode we're going to look at death in the garden. Now I grow lots of regular exotic plants, as we like to call them, and also some pretty rare exotic plants as well. And in this episode we're going to look at 4 very rare palm trees and how unfortunately they've died this year in my garden, and what lessons we can learn about growing rare plants. Now, growing rare plants is great looking for these rarities, growing them in our garden, and when they grow well, it's fantastic. But when they don't, it can be an expensive purchase and quite a disappointing feeling you have when they do die in your garden. And unfortunately, this has happened to me this year. I've got 4 pretty rare to very rare types of palm tree that have died this year for various different reasons. And you're going to have a look at those right now. So here we have a very rare palm. This is a Butia crossed with a Jubaea F3. So it's a hybrid that's been back crossed a couple of times, but it was initially thought it was a cross between a Butia, a Jubaea and a Parajubaea, but there's no sign of Parajubaea in this plant, so it's thought it was just a Butia and Jubaea genetics that got through. Anyway, this has been in the ground for a couple of years, got through winter fine one year, but then didn't make the next year. It spear pulled and went brown quickly, and it never had really cold temperatures, but it's hated being planted out here in the garden. And as you can see, completely shriveled up this year. I left it another year just in case it did come back, but you can see it's totally dead. And if we go towards the centre, we can see there's no growth in there, and if I pull at the centre, the whole thing, look at that, just comes out. And if we just go into the centre there, it's got a big dark hole, no life at all. It's completely dead. Unfortunately, that is a very rare palm. I mean, Butias and Jubaeas are not that rare, but when they're crossed together to make a hybrid, they are pretty rare. And like I said, this was one that's been back crossed as well, so it's pretty rare indeed. And it's just a shame that it's not made it in my garden, whereas other Jubaeas and Butias have been totally fine. This one really has not liked my Yorkshire weather. And this small palm in a pot, unfortunately, has died this year. It got through winter fine, but then in June this year it's spear pulled, so the centre is pulled out, and since it's spear pulled it's not regained a new spear, and the leaves have died off. And this is a hardy palm. Obviously it's died, but it's a hardy in terms of cold hardiness. This is a Trachycarpus wagneranus crossed with Princeps hybrid, so it should be nice and hardy and a good grower. I know it's only a seedling, probably only 2 or 3 years old, but it should have got through last winter fine. It was mainly by the side of the house, but I think when we got down to -5, -6, -7, I brought it into the garage. But I'm not certain, it could have been left out by the house all winter. But either way, it should have come through like the many other Trachycarpus seedlings and small plants have in the garden. And unfortunately, I feel pretty bad about this one dying, because this was gifted to me by a garden visitor to my open days last year, and I thought it would be fine in this pot. It would grow steadily for a year, and then I repot it. I was pretty shocked when it spear pulled this summer. But it just goes to show even hardy plants can die, can spear pull. And this is a big shame, because I had high hopes for this plant to do really well, with it having the waggy and the hybrid of vigour of the Princeps hybrid in it as well. So it should have been a great palm, but unfortunately it's not made it, whereas so many others of a similar size have. Now here's another very rare palm indeed. This is a Butia aries spather crossed with Syagrus romanzophiana Santa Catrina, thought to be the hardiest type of Butia and Syagrus cross, and it did well it did well when it was in a pot, It did well when it was planted out for the first season, but then the first proper winter, well, first winter it had in the ground, it's spear pulled, and that was last winter, coming up to the second winter now in the ground, and it hasn't regained any new growth in the centre. We've still got some green leaves, which is hopeful, but if we get into the centre, move all this other foliage out of the way, we can see we've got no growth point in there. So I'm hoping, give that a bit of shelter over the top, it will get through this winter and hopefully it will come back, but I am not hopeful really of its chances because it's not come back at all this year. So it's probably because it's got no growth point, got no possible chance of regrowing, that these leaves are still alive, but once they're aged and die, there'll be no growth to continue the plant. So we'll give it another season. I think unfortunately this is not going to make it, which is a shame because it's an absolutely gorgeous palm when it gets bigger. Beautiful Butia and Syagrus cross, and it was quite a decent size here in my garden, about 60 centimeters tall, something like that, and it had a decent size beginning of a trunk at the base, which we can see down here. But unfortunately, really not like this place in my garden, and it's not been a good spot for Butias because there was a Syagrus here before that, and we've had another Butia catriensis here, and that has not made it either. So it's not a good spot for Butias, and it's great trying these rare palms, but sometimes they just don't make it, as is the case of this one. Now, thankfully, one plant that hasn't died on me over the years is this wonderful Jubaea chilensis, and I would be extremely sad if I lost this beast of a plant, but thankfully this Jubaea, other Jubaea in the front garden are looking fantastic, doing really well. Unfortunately, we've lost the hybrid Jubaea, but we've got the species and a couple of hybrids still doing well in other parts of the garden. And finally, a palm that I've had, what, for 12, 13, possibly 14 years now, even though it's pretty small, is this Trachycarpus Gemini sectis. So it's a pretty old palm for me here. It's one that I've had for such a long time, but unfortunately it's not going to make it. Yes, it's got some greenish leaves, but there's two big issues with this. It is rotted in the centre, so we have got spear pulls. The centre has rotted and come out like that, and it's also been attacked by basal canker. So if you see at the base, look at the root attachment, I can just move that across because at the base is basically there's no roots should I say, attaching it into the ground. You can see where the first head of this plant was here, and then it's moved, and then got all this canker in here. So if you just turn it over, all this corky wooden area is canker, where it goes sort of like malformed and the roots don't grow. And you can see you've just got one root attaching it, which I've just pulled up now. So that's the end of this wonderful palm. You can see no live roots, not at all, completely dead. So that's not cold that's killed that, it's canker, which is a disease of the plant form where the roots hit the base. It's a shame to see that die, and it does happen to a lot of Trachycarpus in pots if they've been there for a while. So it's always good to have them planted out in the ground as soon as you can. And it's a shame to see this one die, but it's not the end of the story, because just behind me, if I just get up and turn around, we have the same aged Gemini sectis looking great in the ground here, much healthier, bigger leaves on this one as well, but you can see it's a bit wobbly still. I don't think it's got the basal canker, but this one's one of the best specimens I've seen of Gemini sectis. It's got a proper trunk about 15-20 centimeters tall, nice big leaves now, again about 30 centimeters long leaflets on these leaves, and the leaves are across about 50 centimeters across, something like that. That's a nice healthy demise sectors. It just goes to show sometimes plants in pots, even if you protect them in winter, can die, like the demise sectors we've just seen. But thankfully, in this case, we've got a beautiful specimen with its glaucus underneath of the leaves there of demise sectors. The same can't be said of the Butia and Syagrus Jubaea plant we've just looked at, the hybrids, but this one is doing well. So am I disappointed that these plants have died? Well, the answer is of course I am. I buy these plants, grow these plants from seed or small plants over many years, and I want them to do well in my garden, but sometimes it doesn't work out. As we've seen in this video, we've had plants die of basal canker, we've had ones that have just died because they're simply untested, and we've found that they're not hard enough in my location. But until we try some of these rare plants, we don't know if they're going to make it in our garden. So we've got to try these, and it hasn't worked for me, but it doesn't mean it won't work again. If I try the same plant in the same spot, it could grow well, and obviously these plants might grow much better in other parts of the country as well. So it's always worth trying these plants. But obviously, monetary side of things, you know, don't spend lots of money on plants if you think they won't survive and you can't afford to replace them. I've been lucky. The ones I've had, one was gifted to me. The other three I have bought, but I've been able to afford that, and I've got some replacements of similar plants as well in the garden that are growing really, really well. So all is not lost. Yes, we've had death of these plants, but I've had the fun of enjoyment of growing these plants, buying these plants, excitement of actually getting those, seeing them grow over a number of years, like the demise sectors, although it's a very slow growing plant. I've had that, 13, 14 years, and I've got other ones doing very well in the garden as well. So it's the fun of growing these plants. Yes, it's disappointing when we lose them, but there's always other plants to try, and that is something I'll be doing next year. Thank you for watching this edition of Exotic Gardening UK. Join me next week. We'll be doing more in the garden.